just point out a few people in the crowd, just so you know.
Perfect.
I know you've met a lot, but we got some of the House leadership here, Representative Fred Doucette and Jim Kofalt. Thanks for coming. And everyone here is either a state rep, a former state rep, or a future state rep.
Perfect.
We got
400 of them, right? Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So,
I heard they're very well paid, actually.
Yes. Yes. Some of them are overpaid. But,
by $25, right, or something?
$100. The Democrats. And I would just like to point out a couple of other people in the leadership here. We have my favorite state senator, Ruth Ward, here. Thank you, Senator. And, very instrumental in education savings account.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for that.
And also the vice chairman, the new vice chairman. He's actually newer to his job than I am by about 15 minutes. The vice chair of the state party, Ryan Terrell. Ryan, thank you.
Congratulations.
And, yeah.
I've heard the name, but it's good to put the face to it. Good to meet you, man.
And he's a millennial also. And for you millennials, a lot of us boomers, we were actually at the speech with Martin Luther King. And it was very moving. It was very moving. But so I'd just like to kick it off. We do have two of our college Republicans in the back with microphones. To speak, please raise your hand and let them hold the mic in front of you if you can, or else pass it to you. And the one thing I'd ask you is, this is not an opportunity for you to give a speech. I just hate to tell you, but we really don't care what your speech is. We want to hear from Vivek. And that's a very good-natured just way to say, so we can get as many people as possible to ask questions. But I'll just lead it off with, you know, we've got the Larry Fink, woke, ESG, corporate push, and, you know, we look at all these folks in D.C. that are potentially running our country. And sometimes people say, what can I do? What can I do? I'm just an average citizen in New Hampshire. What can I do? What are your suggestions for what average people can do to help the situation?
So I think first is education and self-education, okay? Knowledge is power, okay? There's a long story about Frederick Douglass, actually, who taught himself how to read. That was his ticket out of slavery. What I see today in America is a form of not just psychological slavery, but even financial slavery. One of the things I told people, this is my day job at Strive, what I told them is, here's just 5 questions you can ask your financial advisor. For example, ask them, was my money used to vote for a racial equity audit or an emissions cap? Was it used to vote for executive compensation targets for CEOs that include ESG goals rather than just financial goals? Was it invested in funds that systematically divest from firearms, from oil and gas, from coal? I'm not even telling you what to do. I'm just saying get the answers, right? Knowledge is itself empowerment. That's the first step. And people don't realize this. You do vote every day with your dollars. Whether you know it or not, you're casting that vote. Now, it's not just the financial markets, though. I think it's even in our culture. The ask that I would make of every one of you, okay, is when you find yourself in a room where you believe you're the only person who believes what you do, I think you have a civic obligation as an American today to speak your mind without apology. Thank you. Now, if you do that, I will make a commitment to you in return. The commitment I will make to you, you come find me if I'm wrong about this, is that you will discover you were not the only person in that room who believed what you did. The things I talked about up here, basic American rules of the road, merit, free speech, recognizing China as a threat, needing to declare independence, the people we elect to run the government should be the ones who run the government. These are not partisan ideas. I know I was referring to the conservative movement. Forget my references to the conservative movement. Forget the GOP. These are just basic American rules of the road. And you know what? I don't care if you're black, white, gay, straight, Democrat, or Republican. My question for you is, do you agree with these basic principles? Because if you do, I'm on your team. And you know what I think? I think most Americans do. I think most Americans, I think most of you believe your neighbors and your colleagues and your teammates believe these things to be true as well, but you can't be sure because you feel like you're not allowed to talk about it. So the first step is solving the free speech problem is actually just to start talking openly again. And I am optimistic that if we can take down those false silos that we've created, the silos of speech, then we're actually on the doorstep of an American revival that in retrospect will make us laugh at this moment that we were in, that we weren't in some inevitable national decline like Rome or Carthage or whoever else, that we were just really a little young, going through our version of adolescence, figuring out who we really are, but still able to come out stronger on the other side of it. But it's not going to happen automatically. It's going to happen if people like you in this room live out your civic obligation by, at the very least, educating yourself and speaking your mind. And I think if we do those things, I'm actually very optimistic that not in some cheesy politician kind of way, but like in a real, just in a true way, that I think our best days as a country are really, actually still ahead of us. But it's going to take people living up to it to make it happen.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, yes, ma'am, in the back. Get to grab the mic. He's right behind you.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Renee. I don't know what woke means. What's the definition? I hear the term, it's kind of generic. I kind of have an emotional feeling of what it might be. Could you please explain that to me?
Thank you. It is something we ought to do better in our movement is to define the terms. And I could do the same thing for ESG or anything else if you guys want to talk about this. But woke is what you asked about. So I'm not going to define this in critical terms. I'm going to define it in neutral terms that anyone on any side of a debate can agree with, okay? Being woke refers to waking up or becoming alert to invisible societal injustices and then taking action based on your awareness of those previously undiscovered societal injustices. It's like the equivalent of string theory in physics says that there's these invisible strings that govern the relationships between objects in the universe. The theory of wokeness has a view of a social string theory, that there are invisible social relations and hierarchies and power structures that are not just governed by money, that was the Marxist worldview, but that are governed by other genetically inherited characteristics. And whether or not we all know it, the 150 of us in this room, we're all taught, tightly taught, that kind of taught, in an invisible power struggle with one another. And that the parameters that determine whether we're higher or lower on that chain are our race, our sexual orientation, and our gender. So being woke refers to now seeing that reality, and the promise of the woke religion is that once you see it, you cannot unsee what you have come to know. It's neutral terms. Proponent or opponent, that's what it's about. Now, I think that there's some version of this that begins in a good place, okay? The belief that there's a history of injustice that we have to understand and reckon with if we are to move forward, okay? I don't think that it starts in a good place in the top-down version of it, but sort of in the millennial Gen Z version of it. I think it actually, especially the Gen Z version of it, comes from a good place. But the problem is that it's just a symptom of this deep hole, this black hole of a void in our heart, okay? And I'll tell you how I feel as a millennial, maybe it's how most of us feel, is we're just like blind bats flying in a dark cave, lost trying to find our place and locate ourselves. Bats are blind, you do it through sonar, you send out a signal, and then you locate yourself by seeing what bounces back. That's the role of faith, patriotism, family, standing institutions, unshakable realities for most of human history. Aristotle talked about it's every bit as true in his era as it is today. This is how we deduce our identity, who we really are. But when those pillars disappear, what the woke faith offers is a substitute. It's not real, it's artificial, it's made up. But if we're not getting the signal from the real thing, we're going to take it from the fake thing instead. And then we become addicted to it. It becomes an addiction. And so what do? We tell this generation that you have this moral hunger, all right? But the way you satisfy it is you go to Ben & Jerry's and order a cup of ice cream with some social justice sprinkles on top, not realizing you can't satisfy a moral hunger with fast food. You did that for a few years, but where are we now? That effect is starting to wear off. Young people in this country are recognizing that they're still hungry for something else because you can't satisfy moral hunger with fast food. We need more substantial fare. And that is the opportunity for this movement. I don't think we're going to get it for long, but the moment is open now to fill that void with something else. We can either keep doing what we've been doing, myself included in this, by the way, criticizing the social justice sprinkles, writing books and showing up on Fox News, and I think spotting the problem is part of it, being self-critical here. But I think we can now rise to the occasion to actually fill that void with the vision of American national identity that runs so deep that it then dilutes the woke poison to irrelevance. That's the opportunity. The question is whether we rise to the occasion to do it.
Okay. Great. Let's see. Where's my mics? Let's get Leah. A question for Leah.
So something that scares the life out of me is this combining of what you can and can't say with tech and government power. And that is a central bank digital currency where they can literally reach into, shut off my bank account if I criticize the government. I mean, we saw them do it up in Canada. Yeah. Is there any way that can be derailed? You're a money man.
Yeah, I mean, you want me to take a tech? I mean, I hope people don't get bored by this stuff. But I can talk about it. I can. Stop me if I'm going on too long, because I can go. I love this stuff. So, I mean, I love the topic. I don't love the substance of it. So she's using the term central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, okay? It's a new movement that calls for the digitization of currency, the end of cash, the end of paper cash. And the call for doing it in the United States is that other countries, principally China, are actually doing it. So the argument goes that China's turning the yuan into a digital currency. Well, if China turns the yuan into a digital currency, then that means that the US dollar, if it needs to keep up, needs to switch to digital status. I have so many problems with this, but I'll try to go through just a few of them, okay, with problems with this argument. First is China's doing it for a reason. It's a social credit system, okay? There's no distinction in China between the amount of money you earn through their non-capitalist system of wealth accumulation and standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. You do the wrong thing in China, say the wrong thing that Xi Jinping doesn't like. It's like you're at an arcade, except the arcade is the bank account, and they deduct some points from your account. That's what they can do with the digital currency. That's why China's doing it. So why on earth would we want to imitate that mechanism unless we actually wanted to do the same thing ourselves in this country? I say, hell no, run the opposite direction. Now, there's a couple of other things going on that are also flawed premises even baked into the argument. Two more, I'll stick to two more false premises and then we can move on to another question. False premise number one is that this would somehow result in a weaker dollar. Actually, I think if the rest of the world goes to centrally banked digital currencies that allowed central governments to reach into your pocket and deduct money from your bank account because they didn't like what you said or what you did, then it might be more valuable to hold a dollar that wasn't vulnerable to the same form of interference. So the idea that this economic theory that we just got to keep up with the Joneses, where the Joneses are really the Jinpings, is a flawed piece of logic. And then that gets into a whole separate discussion that we could have or maybe save for another day, which is the fetishization of the strong dollar itself, which is actually a feature of monetary policy in this country that, you know, I think that creates an artificial demand for the dollar when it's the reserve currency of the world, where all else equal, I'd still rather it be the reserve currency of the world, but actually systematically disfavors U.S. exporters over importers by making our actually goods more expensive relative that we export rather than the ones we buy, for no fault of actually manufacturers in the U.S., but just a fault of the way that currency markets have recalibrated against the backdrop of an artificially buoyed dollar. And I like a strong dollar that's organically strong, but not one that's artificially buoyed to that status. And so just on so many levels is this argument for centrally banked digital currencies, the central banking digital currencies in the U.S. a bad idea. It's a road to perdition. But the way you know we shouldn't have even taken the first step is that the whole argument was predicated on the fact that China was doing it and we needed to do it to keep up. That should tell you all you need to know. Yeah, we could stop it. I don't think it's going to, I mean, the more, back to education as a solution. the more people are educated about this, the more this doesn't have a chance under God's green earth to happen in America, and not if I have something to do with it.
Yeah. So, Vivek, with Larry Fink and BlackRock and the ESG scorecards, do you have any examples of bad things that have happened because of corporations not following these Larry Fink kind of promoted rules, or is that still in its infancy? I do see it in some of my reports when I say vote not to do these things.
Well, I'll just give you a couple examples to make it real. Okay, so Apple last year had a shareholder proposal from a group and an advocate that said they wanted to have Apple conduct a racial equity audit. Apple's board, and by the way, this is not some sort of conservative right-wing extremist company here that we're talking about. It gave nine-figure donation to BLM just a couple of years ago. But Apple's first response was no, actually, because if you're a technology company in the US, you have one competitive advantage. It's your talent and your ability to hire the best possible engineers. They said, we don't want to do a racial equity audit, whatever that means. Well, it turns out that nonetheless, BlackRock, State Street, and other financial institutions used our money collectively to tell Apple that, no, you're going to do that racial equity audit. They voted in favor of it anyway. What does Apple's board do? They then conduct that racial equity audit. Now, Xiaomi, who's the biggest smartphone producer in China, who BlackRock's a shareholder of, I don't think they're doing their racial equity audit over there, actually. And they're competing with Apple just fine while Apple conducts its racial equity audit. Is that a one-off example? No, it's not. Home Depot, same thing, racial equity audit 2022. Management didn't want to pursue it. The board didn't want to pursue it. Large financial institutions forced them to anyway. It's not just to the sphere of race or hiring practices. They take the Scope 3 emissions cap at Chevron in 2021, and this is where I'm going to make it real because it affects any small business owners in this country, in the state. Anyone here is consider yourself a small business owner in this state? A good number of people in this room. So again, back to my rule of thumb. The more boring the term sounds, the more you have to pay attention. Okay? You hear the term Scope 3, you're going to be hearing that word a lot more in the next couple of years. Mark my word on that. There was a proposal for a Scope 3 emissions cap at Chevron, major American oil company. What did that say? It says that not only do they have to reduce their own emissions, that's Scope 1, but that they have to also reduce emissions of anyone in their entire supply chain. That includes a customer or a supplier, even if you're a small private business, in their supply chain. They are then enforcing on you your own emissions cap. Chevron's board said, no, we don't want to do this. Nonetheless, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard use your money, our money, to force Chevron to do it by voting in favor of those proposals, which effectively applies the kind of pressure that requires the company to bend the knee. What does that contribute to? That contributes to higher prices at the pump. I mean, anybody notice we had a little bit of an energy shortage in this country, higher prices at the pump over the last year? It is not an accident that it happens in part because of this ESG force being implemented through capital markets. So on one hand, you're paying for $5 gas at the pump last year. On the other hand, what you didn't know is your 401k account was actually being used to give you that $5 gas at the pump. And so who's literally left holding the bag? It's Americans who are left holding the bag, which, as I said earlier, the project that Chevron is then forced to drop are picked up by the likes of PetroChina, who doesn't apply those emissions caps over there. And then if you had one final doubt as to what was really going on here, what's the agenda that's really at work, the thought I'll leave with you on this topic is the climate change movement actually has nothing to do with the climate. If it did, this ESG movement would actually be embracing nuclear energy, the best known system, best known form of energy, carbon-free energy production known to mankind, and yet Vanguard's ESG funds, for example, systematically exclude nuclear energy companies from their fund basket. Now, why would that be? It's because nuclear energy, not that it's not good enough, it might just be too good at addressing the problem on its own terms. And then what happens if we actually solve the carbon-free energy production problem without actually having achieved global equity, which is really what this was about, making the West, America included, apologize for its sins from epochs past. And so the E, S, the G, E stands for environmental, S stands for social. The E is really just a Trojan horse for the S. The climate change movement is just a vector, it's a vehicle, it's a Trojan horse for doing what some angry teenager, you could listen to her on a given day, will tell you. She says it, she's more honest about it than the rest of them, says that actually this isn't about just the climate, it's about colonialism, it's about social injustice, it's about more than just the climate. She's right. She's actually at least saying what she's thinking, it's on the mind of the rest of this movement, is that it's a vehicle for advancing a social agenda that we would never have accepted if we said it was really about equity. So we're going to make up a new religion and say it's about the climate instead. That's what's really going on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Lily.
Thank you. That to listen to you talk tonight is like a miracle, like a voice to me, because Lily Tang Williams, I was born in China, and I was enjoying my life, living American dream, and then wake up to see this country is becoming like the country I just left. Mm-hmm. They follow me here, like you said, the equity communist term, ESG, China social credit system. But the saying though, we have been screaming out of our lungs as immigrants to warn people, they are here, they infiltrate into our country, we have enemies within, and now we have globalists are working with China on ESG, on all kinds of stuff. They are not elected by us. So what would you suggest at the state level versus the federal level, what we can do and to counter-strike that? Of course, with the free market too, to work together. This is a year for people to wake up. Mm-hmm. We just saw the magic balloon, right? So everybody's talking about China now. But it's a test. It's on Americans' response. Yeah.
It was a trial balloon in the literal sense. Absolutely, I agree with you.
But we have the worst balloon, like a balloon. It's in our kids' cell phone called a TikTok. Mm-hmm. that cannot be ignored. So what do you suggest the state level what we can do, and the federal legislation, Congress level what we can do?
The first thing I want to say about you, Lily, I had a chance to meet Lily yesterday, is that in my mind, she is an embodiment of this word we bandy around a lot in our movement called courage. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for saying that for Lily. Okay. Courage means two things. It means having conviction and being willing to make a sacrifice to act out and live your convictions. The first part, many of us do well. The second part is hard. Lily and I share something in common. She and I cannot go to China. The difference between Lily and I is I don't have family in China. She does. She is making a sacrifice to speak the way she is, to act on her convictions, and that's what I call courage. And sometimes it takes someone coming into this country, like my parents or like you, to see what my kids, frankly, will just be able to take for granted and inherit. And you don't always value something that you inherit. You only value something you have a stake in building. And so the question is, what do we do? Okay, I'll leave you with quote from one of my favorite Republicans, certainly of all time, spoke 160 years ago. That's Abraham Lincoln, who famously said, at the height of the Civil War in 1863, the dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. Okay, and I say the dogmas of 1980 are inadequate to address the unique challenges that we face in the year 2023. The reason Ronald Reagan was my hero, okay, it was not because he slashed taxes and government regulations and ushered in an era of prosperity whose fruits we continue to enjoy to this day, by the way. Those things are great, but the thing that made him remarkable was that he stood up to the orthodoxies in his own party to do what needed to be done in his moment. And I think that's where our conservative movement needs to celebrate the legacy of Reagan, not by just reciting the slogans, but by marshaling that spirit of looking with fresh eyes at the moment and the unique challenges that we face and come up with unique solutions that actually rise to that occasion. And I will say things that I would not have said 10 years ago, that we should ban addictive social media products, at least in kids who are under the age of 16. Why is that not at the top of I don't think about a conservative agenda, pro-American agenda? I will believe in getting rid of civil service protections in this country that create a government that lends itself to capture if you have a permanent administrative state. And as much as I respect even the people who have done the best job, even a prior president, our last president, who highlighted this more clearly than anybody else, Complaining to the press about it is not enough. A belief in Article 2 authority to say that if you're the constitutionally elected president of the United States, you're going to do what you're constitutionally empowered to do. The next time there's an Anthony Fauci or a Merrick Garland or a James Comey, you do what the president's constitutionally empowered to do. You fire them, you fire the legions of people under them, and you fire the managerial industrial complex around them. So unshackle ourselves from the dogma, and I think new possibilities await. That's where I'm at.
Great. We're going to take a question right here. But while you're walking over with the mic, I just wanted to let you know that Fred Ward, he was with Abraham Lincoln when he said that. So, yeah, he can quote it verbatim. Thank you, Fred. Well, we're going to have a question here, and then you can,
Hello.
you can talk.
Okay.
So you can be next, Fred. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for hosting. So I don't want to get too close to the conspiracy ledge, but I'll get close to it. So the E is the environmental and the ESG, and you talked about Davos and the WHO, the so-called leaders of the WHO. They want us, one of the bigger issues for them is to reduce for us to reduce our carbon footprint, not them, right? But I'm wondering if anything during your research has come across your desk with some meat on the bones that may have talked about the other thing that they believe should happen, which is depopulation. They believe that the Earth is overpopulated, right? Anything that may be worth discussing?
So this is all part of the climate change movement. It's going to make a lot of people mad, not in this room, but in my circles, okay? It is just part of this global degrowth movement. It is an illusion, okay? Tell you a couple, you want to talk about facts? Follow the science. Okay, let's follow the science, let's follow the facts. How many, you think about climate change, why do we care about climate change if for none other reason than the impact that it has on human beings? We're going to talk about the impact it has on human beings. Let's measure that impact. One thing you might start with is the death rate from climate-related disasters, okay? This is internationally undisputed. You won't hear it, but nobody's going to dispute this fact. For every 100 people that died of a climate-related disaster in the year 1920, how many of them died in the year 2020? 1. Okay? 98 to 99% reduction in climate-related disaster death rate. Why is that? Was it through the use of less fossil fuels? No, it was powered by fossil fuels through the buildings and the heating systems and the temperature and the cooling systems and the temperature controlled systems that we have. And by the way, this one makes a lot of people mad. 8 times as many people die of actually the wrong temperature related deaths, right? Cold temperature rather than warm temperatures. And the best answer to all temperature related deaths is actually more abundant access to, you guessed it, fossil fuels. So you want to have the fact-based debate about the science, the WHO, technocratic class, great, let's have it. Let's talk about human impact. But what this is really lurking beneath, what is lurking beneath this agenda is not only that it's neutral to human flourishing, but that it is actually anti-human at its core. My friend Alex Epstein speaks about this brilliantly. It is a global degrowth movement that isn't a conspiracy theory. And you'll hear this term bandied about a lot, conspiracy theory. There's one version of the conspiracy theory that's like the kind you watch in a movie where people are actually getting together in a smoke-filled room and then plotting it out and then foisting it on you. It doesn't happen that way in the real world, not most of the time. It's what I call emergent conspiracy. It's the same facts laid out, and it just happens in slow motion in plain sight. It's not even hiding. I'll give you one of them right now. Is if you imagine that we were in that conference room before, okay? Closed door, no windows. Imagine we were the CEOs of Exxon, Shell, ConocoPhillips, BP, and pick your favorite 5th biggest energy company in the world. Okay, pick a U.S. energy company, Marathon Energy. And we decided behind closed doors, cigars-filled room, that we were going to slash oil production and then prices spike at the pump as a result. That would be the conspiracy that we would arrest people over. It's price fixing, classic antitrust violation. But now, go to the front page of the Climate Action 100 Plus network. Okay, it's $68 trillion worth of asset managers that have signed a pledge. It's on the front page of their website that they're committing to effectively pressure those firms and firms like them to do the same thing. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy reality. It's just an emergent reality that's actually the way the conspiracy presents itself in the real world. And again, I come back to knowledge is actually our source of empowerment. We don't need to do it. It's not through violence. It's not through physical force. We empower ourselves with that knowledge. But you're right. Just like the other side I said in the answer to the woke question, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's the first step to our path forward.
Okay, great. Let's have Fred, and then we'll go to Warren.
I'm a meteorologist, and I got involved in this thing back in the 1960s. But that's not what I want to ask. I find that sometimes when the thing is crazy, that rather than answer it directly, you make fun of it. And so I'd like to ask you a question. Is there a difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and diversity, inclusion, and equity? One is DEI, the other is DIE. And I might suggest that if we called it DIE, we would maybe eliminate a lot of it. Other than that, whatever you want to talk about is fine, but not now.
I like that. DEI to DIE. I'm gonna start calling it that. I like it. Thank you very much, Fred.
Thank you, Fred. But are you sure that wasn't 1860 that you were?
No, I was working with you back then.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, we do this
That's
all
funny.
the time.
Yeah, you guys sparring.
I'll get
That's
you
funny.
next time. Warren.
Yep. So I want to go back to the woke thing for a second and take a little back a turnaround. My generation grew up in the Disney era, and those fundamental family and truth and the pillars that he, for the most part, and there's a lot of controversy, but he was putting out in the early days, and things that we could feel great about America in a way. Have come to now our grandchildren's generation, where I saw yesterday a trailer of a new cartoon for CRT. I don't know if anybody else in this room saw it. And it made me, disgusted, but because we cannot trust any aspect of Disney to be in favor of anything that is basically American anymore. And we have to be willing, like the Americans, or that became Americans in the 1700s, to give up the manufactured goods from England. We have to be willing, and then my question to you is, how do we do it? To give up the Disney addiction and turn it off. Because we can't stop them from airing it on their own station. And, well, okay. A gay couple, men, are arguing, and the black male is saying, well, it's all a lie about Lincoln. He actually didn't free the slaves. He would only free the slaves in the South, but didn't free them in the North, and all these other things. And eventually it turned around with a white male partner says, I'm so ashamed for being white. And that is the theme of the whole, is that they want retribution for being black. For 150, 175 years of 120, 250 other nationalities coming to America and building America. And they're saying the blacks built America, not the whites. And it isn't whites and blacks, it's browns and yellows and reds and Indians and all races of the world that flooded the gates when the Statue of Liberty said, bring me your humble.
So Warren, could you get back to what the question was?
What do you do? My question is, what do we do with this powerhouse of media? Is it just being that willing to just turn it off? Is that
So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be unappreciative.
No. The color actually helped there. Thank you for that. So media is the toughest frontier to tackle. But I'll tell you, there's top-down solution and a bottom-up solution, and I think we're going to need both. Neither one's going to be easy. The top-down solution is, I'm going to tell you a fun fact about Disney. I actually wrote a shareholder letter to Disney and their board questioning their governance and oversight of Bob Chapek, who made the politicized decisions that got the company into a hole last year. Funny fact about Disney is you look at who are their top shareholders on that top list is none other than BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Now, you would assume that in a free market, On a free, not to pick on, but in a free market, what would you expect? Competition. So this is a great opportunity for who are Disney's competitors. So let's look up who are Disney's competitors. Paramount Pictures. Well, who owns Paramount Pictures? Paramount Global. Who are the top shareholders of Paramount Global? BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. They operate some theme parks. Universal Studios. Let's see. Who operates Universal Studios? Well, Universal Studios is a jointly owned subsidiary of General Electric and Comcast. And then you look at who are the top shareholders of General Electric and Comcast. It is none other than BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So we tell ourselves this mythology that we invented, that we live in a system of free market capitalism or whatever, when the capital owners don't want Disney to be behaving this way. The capital owners would rather Paramount Pictures or Universal Studios be taking advantage of it. But we've created this fiction that the shareholders, the institutional gatekeepers, the people who are actually, instead of palace walls in old world Europe, now palace walls in the back of Park Avenue in BlackRock's corner office, telling the entire American economy how to run. We need to fix that top down. These are fiduciary violations. They're antitrust violations. The use of state pension fund dollars constitutes a First Amendment violation. It's called compelled speech, when the government forces you to contribute money to a pension and then engages in political speech. It engages in political speech by giving it to BlackRock. But these are legal solutions that we can't just lull ourselves to sleep at night by saying the free market mantra 10 times before you go to sleep and then pretend like that somehow solved the problem, waking up to the fact that the free market cannot fix what is not free to fix. I think there's a reasonable discussion to be had about breaking up BlackRock. Okay, it is a firm that cannot represent constituents who have, it's not that it's too big, it's that you can't be a good fiduciary to clients who have fundamentally different interests any more than you can be a lawyer in the courtroom arguing the prosecution and the defense in the same case. Okay, it's a fiduciary point, it's not just a big is bad point. That's the top-down solution. But it does take two to tango, okay? Why aren't people pulling that cord? It's easy to say it, but what is it in our nature that causes us not to? Because we can do the boycott thing and it'll last for all of a week and then we go on with our lives and resubscribe. It's the same question about, it's something innate in our human nature, right? It's easy to complain about the other. It's a lot harder to look in the mirror. What is it within each of us that causes us to want to bow down to the new master? It's the same thing when the Israelites were lost in the desert. They said they want to go back and be ruled by Pharaoh. It exists in each of us. It is an impulse to bend the knee and be ruled by a new class of ruler. And I think that that's going to require a deeper cultural change. How are we going to invigorate that cultural change? There's no silver bullet. I do think leaders can make a difference. I do think in the political realm, there's an opportunity for the GOP to make a difference. The right kinds of leaders starting at the top of the Republican Party, being able to lead a way that leads to a national revival. But it's not just in politics. It's leaders in churches. It's leaders in our private sector, CEOs who actually lead the people who work for them. Just because your employees ask for something doesn't mean that's actually what they want. It's like the equivalent of a baby that's asking for its pacifier when it's really just hungry for a bottle, right? You got to feed them what they actually need, not what they're necessarily crying for on a given day. That requires leadership in every sphere of our lives, whether it's politics or whether it's private sector leadership or whether it's even church leadership. And so I think it's got to be both, the top-down fixes, but also the bottom-up cultural revival that we're going to need. And at some point, those two forces are going to meet, and that's when we see our national revival.
Okay, well, Vivek, we're at our time limit, and we just want to thank you so much for your insight and coming up.
Thank
and
you.
Give him a great big round
Thank
of
you very
applause.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Can I just tell everyone we can give him a number?